On a quiet trail in Missouri, Frank Delaney spotted a bobcat making trip after trip, carrying her newborns one by one away from the river. 15 minutes later, she returned, carrying another kitten. Each trip took longer, her shoulders growing more tense, as if she knew time was running out. He watched, breath held, as she came back again and again, moving her whole litter one by one. This wasn't just a mother bobcat relocating her babies, because mothers don't move their young without a reason. Something wasn't right. What followed wasn't a dramatic rescue or a heroic grab, but a tense waiting game. And no one could have predicted what would happen next. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Riverwalk outside of Millstone, Missouri was usually the kind of place that helped people breathe again. In early spring, when the cottonwoods were still half bare and the water ran high and cold, the trail stayed quiet. A few fishermen came at sunrise. A couple of older neighbors took their slow evening laps. Most folks stuck to town until the weather warmed. Frank Delaney liked it that way. He was 68, retired from the county ambulance service, and he walked the river because it gave his hands something to do besides fidget. The rhythm of steady steps, the crunch of gravel, the soft hiss of wind through reeds. It kept his thoughts from bunching up in the corners of his mind where grief liked to hide. That evening, the sky was a pale blue that looked almost washed out, like someone had left it too long in the sun. Frank had his old binoculars hanging from his neck more out of habit than expectation. He'd spotted eagles out here before, and once, a river otter that made him laugh out loud like a kid. He'd just rounded a bend where the trail dipped closer to the water when he saw her. At first, it was only motion, something tawny slipping between the willow shadows. Frank slowed, then stopped completely. A bobcat. She stepped into a thin patch of evening light, and Frank's breath caught. The animal was smaller than most people imagined. Sleek, muscular, built for sudden, quiet power. Her ears were tipped with little black tufts. Her coat was mottled gold and brown, the pattern of dead leaves and sunlight. But it wasn't her beauty that made Frank's stomach tighten. It was what she carried. A kitten, tiny, gray-brown, limp with that loose newborn heaviness, hung gently from her mouth. She held it with a grip that was firm without being cruel, the way nature designed mothers to do it. Her steps were careful, not limping, not stumbling, just deliberate, as if every footfall had to be measured. Frank didn't move. He didn't raise his phone. He didn't even shift his weight. Years of emergency work had taught him something most people never learned. When you rush toward a crisis, you often make it worse. The bobcat crossed a narrow strip of mud near the waterline and disappeared into thick brush. Frank stayed rooted until the reeds stopped trembling. Then he quietly backed up a few yards and sank onto a flat boulder near the trail, using it like a blind. He lifted his binoculars with slow hands and scanned the brush. He had no idea what he was about to witness. 15 minutes later, she came back. Same path, same cautious pace. Only now she carried another kitten. Frank's throat tightened. 2 trips meant a litter. A mother moving babies was never casual. It was a decision made under pressure. Predators, scent, flooding, human disturbance. Something was wrong. When she vanished again, Frank shifted his gaze to the bank. The river was higher than it had been a week ago. He could see fresh debris snagged in branches, grass, strips of bark, a plastic bottle caught like a warning flag. Upstream, storm clouds had been stacking for days. The forecast on the radio that morning had mentioned rising waters and localized flooding. Frank hadn't thought much of it. He lived in town now, not out on the land. But bobcats lived by the land's rules, and she was acting like the rules were changing fast. The mother returned again and then again. Each time, another kitten. Frank counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth trip took longer. When she finally emerged, her head was lower, her shoulders tense. She carried the smallest kitten yet, and for a brief moment her eyes flicked toward the trail. Frank held his breath, utterly still. The bobcat didn't hiss. She didn't posture. She didn't charge. She simply looked at him the way wild animals look at humans when they can't afford panic. Alert, assessing, and painfully focused on what matters. Then she disappeared into the brush for the fifth time. Frank sat there long after, letting the evening cool settle on his skin, listening to the river's steady push. In his mind, he saw the tiny kittens dangling one by one from their mother's mouth, and something inside him ached with a familiar helplessness. He wanted to do something, but he also knew that doing something could mean chasing her off, separating her from her babies, and turning a hard night into a fatal one. So he did what he could. He watched. When the mother didn't return for nearly 40 minutes, Frank slowly stood and eased closer. Not into the brush, not toward the den, just to a spot where he could see the general area she'd been using. He crouched and scanned with binoculars. Through a narrow gap in the willows, he caught a glimpse of movement. 5 kittens pressed together in a tight heap, their bodies barely more than a bundle of fur and twitching ears. They were nursing in silence, tucked into a shallow pocket beneath tangled roots. The mother lay curled around them, her body forming a living wall, her eyes half-lidded but never truly resting. Frank swallowed hard. They were so small, too small to survive if the river rose another foot. He backed away the same way he'd approached, careful to leave no disturbance, then walked straight home without finishing his loop. His hands were shaking by the time he reached his porch. He didn't call the police. He didn't call animal control. He called Cedar Ridge Wildlife Center 30 miles out, the place everyone in the county knew about, but only a few had ever stepped inside. The kind of place run on grit, donations, and a quiet kind of stubborn love. A woman answered on the second ring. "Cedar Ridge, this is Hannah." Frank cleared his throat. "Ma'am, my name is Frank Delaney. I'm by the Riverwalk in Millstone. I just watched a bobcat move her litter, 5 kittens. They're right near the bank. Water's already high." There was a pause, the kind that meant a professional mind was sorting facts into a plan. "Okay," Hannah said gently. "First thing, thank you for calling. Second thing, do not approach them, and do not try to move anything near the den. Can you tell me if the mother looked injured?" "No," Frank said. "She's strong, just purposeful. Like she's running out of time." "That makes sense," Hannah replied. "They move litters when they feel threatened. Flooding, coyotes, raccoons, people, dogs on the trail, any of it can trigger relocation." Frank hesitated. "Is there anything I can do without messing it up?" There was a softness in her voice that made Frank's eyes sting unexpectedly. "Yes, you can keep your distance and help us reduce risk. If you can, we can set up a quiet, concealed shelter nearby, something she can choose if she wants it. But it has to be her decision. We never want to push a wild mother into a corner." Frank exhaled. "Tell me what to do." An hour later, Frank met Hannah and a volunteer named Chase at the far end of the trail, where the parking lot lights didn't reach the brush. Hannah was in her 30s, hair pulled back, wearing work boots that looked like they'd seen 100 mud seasons. Her hands were calm and sure. Chase carried a tote full of supplies. They moved like people who had done this before. Quiet, efficient, respectful of every shadow. Hannah showed Frank a plastic storage bin with a hole cut neatly on one side, lined with straw. Not hay, she reminded him, because hay molds faster. The bin was covered in leaf litter and cedar boughs to dull the human smell and make it blend. "This isn't a trap," Hannah whispered. "It's an option. If the river rises, or if the den site feels unsafe, she may choose it. Or she may not, and we accept that." Frank nodded, barely daring to breathe. They placed the shelter a careful distance from the current den, close enough to be within the mother's safe zone, far enough that it didn't force a decision. Then they retreated. Hannah set a small trail camera angled toward the shelter, hidden low behind a log. "Now we wait," she said. Waiting was harder than Frank expected. He went back the next evening and sat on his boulder again, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, watching the reeds move like slow waves. He didn't see the bobcat right away. The river sounded louder tonight. The air smelled like rain. Then, just as dusk began to soften the world, she appeared. She paused near the bank, ears flicking. Frank felt his whole body go still. The bobcat moved toward the old root pocket, checked her kittens, then slipped away. 20 minutes later, she returned carrying one of the babies. Not toward the roots, toward the shelter. Frank's vision blurred so suddenly he had to lower the binoculars. The mother placed the kitten inside the straw-lined bin with a tenderness that looked almost like careful hands. Then she left and returned again. And again. 5 trips, 5 kittens. When she finally curled inside the shelter, wrapping her body around her litter the way she had beneath the roots, Frank pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from making a sound. A wild animal had chosen safety without being forced. Chosen it on her own terms. Frank had seen plenty of raw human suffering in his life. Car wrecks, heart attacks, tragedies that turned families into broken shapes overnight. He had not expected that a bobcat settling her babies into a simple, hidden box near a river would make tears slide down his cheeks, like they'd been waiting years for a reason. Behind him, someone's foot scraped gravel. Frank turned and saw Mrs. Collins from 2 doors down, standing at a respectful distance. She held a grocery bag and looked like she'd been crying too. "I saw you out here yesterday," she whispered. "Frank? Is she okay?" Frank nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "She's doing what she's supposed to do." Mrs. Collins stared toward the brush, her voice trembling. "I didn't know wild animals trusted like that." Frank swallowed. "I don't think it's trust. I think it's desperation and instinct and a mother's math. She's choosing the best odds." That night, the rain came hard. By morning, the river was up another 8 inches. Hannah called Frank before noon. "We need to talk," she said. Frank's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "The camera footage shows the mother is using the shelter," Hannah said. "That's good, but the forecast just updated. They're calling for more rain tonight and a rapid rise, possibly enough to flood that whole bank. Also, one of the kittens looked slow in the footage, not nursing as strongly." Frank closed his eyes. "So what do we do?" "We intervene," Hannah said, and Frank could hear the weight in her voice. but only because the risk is tipping. If the den floods, those kittens can drown or become hypothermic. If one kitten is already weak, it may not survive another cold night. Frank whispered, "Will the mother abandon them if you take them?" "We do everything we can to keep them together," Hannah replied. "That's the goal. A bonded family has the best chance. But trapping a wild mother is delicate, and we have to minimize stress." That afternoon, a small team gathered. Hannah, Chase, a state-permitted wildlife officer named Ramirez, and Frank, who stood back and did exactly what he was told. They waited until the mother left to hunt, confirmed by the trail camera's live feed. Then Hannah approached the shelter quickly, moving like a shadow. She lifted the bin's lid just enough to slide a soft, dark cloth over the kittens and scoop them into a warmed carrier. The kittens didn't scream. They froze. Their tiny bodies went still, eyes shut tight, the natural response of a wild baby that knows it cannot fight. Frank's heart cracked at the sight. Then, just as quickly, Hannah placed the carrier at the entrance of a covered humane trap positioned where the mother would return. The trap wasn't baited with food. It was baited with something stronger than hunger. The sound and scent of her own babies. When the bobcat came back, she moved fast, faster than Frank had seen before. Her head swung side to side, ears forward, body low. She found the carrier immediately. A low, urgent sound came from her throat. Not a growl, not a yowl, something in between. A voice meant for the dark. She stepped into the trap. The door closed smoothly. For one terrible second, she threw her weight against it, eyes wide, muscles rigid with panic. Hannah covered the trap with a blanket at once, turning chaos into darkness, giving the mother a chance to settle. Frank stood frozen, fists clenched, fighting the urge to apologize out loud to an animal who would never understand words, only outcomes. Officer Ramirez spoke softly. "This is the best way, ma'am," he told Hannah. "Quick, quiet, together." They loaded the mother and kittens into the back of the Wildlife Center van. The ride to Cedar Ridge was done in silence. The carriers strapped in, the cabin kept dim. Every bump in the road felt too loud. At Cedar Ridge, the team moved into a dedicated family enclosure. Private, insulated, designed for exactly this situation. The mother was released into the pen first, the carrier with kittens placed nearby so she could reach them immediately. She didn't hesitate. The moment she was free, she went straight to her babies, sniffed each one in a fast sweep, then gathered them close and lay down, pulling them under her like a blanket made of muscle and fur. And then, like a switch flipped, she began to groom them. Lick, lick, lick. Frank's knees nearly gave out. Hannah watched on a monitor rather than standing at the enclosure. "See?" she whispered to Frank. "That's what we want. Continuity. A mother doing mother things. She's stressed, but she's still here with them. That's everything." Over the next days, the weak kitten was gently supported. The staff didn't handle the babies more than necessary. They weighed them quickly, checked hydration, gave warmed fluids when needed, and then stepped away. Most of the work was done by the bobcat herself. She nursed, she cleaned, she repositioned her kittens when they wriggled too far. She lifted her head at every unfamiliar sound, eyes sharp, body ready, wild to the bone, even in a safe enclosure. Frank visited the center twice a week, not to hover, not to touch, but to stand in the hallway and watch the monitor like it was the most important channel on Earth. The kittens began to change. At first, they were only tiny lumps that squeaked in their sleep. Then, their legs strengthened. They started to scoot, then crawl, then clumsily tumble over each other like they were learning gravity for the first time. Their eyes opened slowly, slits at first, then wider, revealing that cautious, measured awareness that wild cats are born with. Not carefree curiosity, watchfulness, distance. And the mother bobcat never let them forget it. If a kitten ventured too far from her belly, she nudged it back with her nose. If one wandered toward the edge of the nesting area, she hooked it gently with a paw and pulled it in. She taught them, without lessons or speeches, that closeness meant safety. When the kittens were old enough, the staff began brief, controlled outdoor enrichment in a larger pen attached to the enclosure. Logs, brush piles, natural soil, shifting light. The mother led the way, and the kittens followed like shadows with wobbly legs. If they startled at a bird overhead, she stiffened and they froze with her, learning that stillness could be a shield. Frank watched it all and felt something in his chest that had been locked up for a long time begin to loosen. He didn't romanticize it. He didn't pretend they were pets or that they loved him. But he couldn't deny the truth. Witnessing their survival made him want to survive too. Summer warmed the world outside the center's fences. The kittens grew into sleek young bobcats with longer legs, sharper eyes, and the kind of confidence that didn't need to prove itself. They stopped seeking comfort as often, nursing less, exploring more. They began to pounce on moving leaves. They practiced stalking on each other. Their mother corrected them with a swat when play got too loud or too bold, reminding them that in the wild, noise could be death. And then, one morning, Hannah called Frank with a different kind of voice. "It's time," she said. Frank sat down hard in his kitchen chair. "Time? Time to go home," Hannah replied. The release site was not near the Riverwalk. That place had been an emergency, a battleground of rising water and human footsteps. Cedar Ridge chose a protected stretch of public land in the Ozark foothills. Dense cover, clean water, low road traffic. A place where the mother could hunt and the young bobcats could learn without bumping into people every day. They used a soft release pen, giving the family time to orient to new smells and sounds before the door opened. The evening of the release, the sky was the color of honey, and the air carried the sharp scent of pine. Frank stood with Hannah and Officer Ramirez at a respectful distance. No crowd, no cheering, no flash photography. Just quiet, just dignity. Hannah unlatched the pen door and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the mother bobcat appeared at the threshold, body low, ears forward, reading the world like a map. Behind her, 5 young bobcats pressed close, no longer babies, no longer helpless, wild, wary, ready. The mother stepped out first. She moved into the brush with the same measured power Frank had seen on the Riverwalk, as if she carried not just her body but a whole legacy of survival. One of the juveniles paused, looking back at the open pen, then at the humans in the distance. Not affection, not gratitude, simply awareness. Then the young bobcat turned and followed its mother, vanishing into green shadow. One by one, the others slipped after her. The last kitten, now nearly grown, hesitated at the edge of the brush. For a heartbeat, it stood where the sunlight touched its fur, a living thread between rescue and wilderness. And then it was gone too. Frank didn't realize he was crying until Mrs. Collins, who had quietly come along at Hannah's invitation because she'd been part of the watching too, pressed a tissue into his hand. "They made it," she whispered, voice breaking. Frank nodded, unable to speak. Hannah kept her eyes on the trees, listening, waiting for any sign of distress. But the woods held only the normal sounds of evening. Insects starting their songs, a distant bird call, leaves shifting in the breeze. Finally, Hannah let out a slow breath. "That's what success looks like," she said softly. "Not an animal staying with us. An animal leaving us." Frank stared at the place where the bobcats had disappeared, and the ache in his chest wasn't the sharp kind anymore. It was a tender kind, like a bruise that proved something had been alive and still mattered. Back at the Riverwalk in Millstone the next week, Frank sat on his boulder again. The water had dropped, the willow brush had settled. The trail was quiet. He didn't see the bobcat, and he didn't expect to. That was the point. But he could still picture her. The way she carried each kitten one by one, refusing to give up on a bank that was failing her. The way she chose a shelter without being forced. The way she stepped into a trap because her babies needed her more than she feared the unknown. People talked about wild animals like they were symbols. Dangerous, mysterious, untouchable. Frank had learned something truer. Wildness was not the absence of love. Wildness was love that did its job without asking for applause. And sometimes, if a person was patient enough to simply watch, careful enough to do no harm, and humble enough to let a mother decide, the outcome could be something so quietly powerful it left grown adults in tears. Not because the bobcat became part of the human world, but because, for one fragile season, the human world stepped back just enough for her to keep her kittens in theirs.